Unhandcuffed. Yeah, so that's how we get the key for these. Hang on, here is it.
This is 16-year-old Eric Allmendinger, alongside his grandmother and father, currently inside the Palmer Post interview room in Palmer, Alaska. Eric is being escorted to his seat in order to be questioned regarding the disappearance of one of his friends, David Grunwald. Unbeknownst to Eric, this interrogator already has all of the information that he needs in order to very likely have Eric convicted. He had actually just spent about 35 minutes prior to this moment explaining such evidence to Eric's grandmother and father. Yet, he strategically chooses not to disclose this information to Eric so early into the questioning. However, before we can get back to viewing this interrogation, we need to start about 1 month earlier. On November 13th, 2016, 16-year-old David Grunwald was enjoying his Sunday afternoon hanging out with his girlfriend, Victoria. The two were just taking it easy and lounging around the house, slightly dabbling at their high school homework. After eating supper, at around 6 p.m., David Grunwald approached his mother and said that he was heading out to drive Victoria home. She replied, "Okay, just make sure you're home before 9 p.m. The two then hit the road and David dropped Victoria off at home. David then suddenly calls his mother again. He says that a couple people from school are at his friend Eric's house, and that he wanted to stop by on the way home, so he was just hoping he could have a later curfew. His mom then says that that's fine, and he can have another half hour, and to be home by 9:30 instead. 10 p.m. rolls by, and David is nowhere in sight. His mother begins calling and texting him, but he was not responding. So she tries his girlfriend. Victoria answers and confirms that David had dropped her off before 7 p.m. And then he seemed to have been heading home from there. Since David's mom knew which of the friend's house he was stopping by, she then tried to call the friend, Eric. Eric answered, but told her that he hadn't seen David at all that evening. So her concerns continued to escalate, and after driving around for a couple hours looking for David herself, she then decided to contact the police. A missing persons report was filed, and due to the town's population being less than 8,000, law enforcement promptly began an investigation. Law enforcement released pictures of David and spoke of his disappearance on the local news, asking public for any assistance in locating him. And just under 16 hours after reporting David missing, a discovery was made.
David's vehicle was discovered yesterday afternoon up this back dirt road in Wasilla. Now, it had been burned to a crisp, but David wasn't inside. And back at his home, his mother is certain that somebody knows where he is. David is a student at Matsu Career and Tech High School. His mother says he spent Sunday night at the house studying with his girlfriend. He'd left to take her home, and that's the last time his mother saw him. Around 11:30 that night, she called troopers and filed a missing persons report. Troopers were able to ping his phone yesterday morning along the Palmer-Wasilla Highway, but his mother says no calls or text had been sent since Sunday night. His debit card hasn't been used either. Monday afternoon, David's car was found abandoned and burned on a trail off Church Road. His mother says all of this is extremely out of character for her son.
We don't know anything. We don't know where he's at, what his situation is, where he is, if he's crumpled up somewhere, hurt, or somebody has him against his will somewhere. We don't have any idea. And the more the time goes on, the harder it gets.
It was David's Ford Bronco, found burnt to a crisp and abandoned in a desolate location, hidden within the woods approximately 20 miles from his girlfriend Victoria's house. Based on the way that the vehicle was discovered, it did not take long before the idea of foul play was brought up. And as the days led deeper into the winter, the likelihood of finding David alive was beginning to dwindle as well. Just 3 weeks after discovering David's Ford Bronco, on December 2nd, police made another gruesome discovery.
I thank all of you for help looking for him and being there for me. He was an amazing person, and he will forever be in my heart.
David Grunwald's remains were found frozen solid, left in the snow less than a half hour away from town. His body was immediately examined, and the cause of death was ruled as repeated blunt force trauma to the head and neck, followed by a gunshot wound also to his head. The next day, on December 3rd, 2016, the police publicly state that they have arrested a suspect in the case. That suspect is Eric Allmendinger. As it turns out, investigators had been focused on Eric from very early on in the case, and since Eric was the friend that David claimed to be on his way to visiting that night, it only seemed logical. Investigators checked the highways near the town and followed up any potential tips, but everything seemed to point back towards Eric. On top of this, Eric was acting very strange, denying seeing David for weeks, avoiding several interviews, and not demonstrating any grief over the loss of one of his friends. Regardless, Eric did confirm that David stopped by his house that night. However, Eric stated that he did not see David, and David just dropped off a friend and left. Apparently, Eric then jumped in a cab to Anchorage, traveled the 43 miles to get there, and then partied for the rest of the night into the next morning.
We gotta handle this in advance of it being proven to be a homicide. We have to handle it like it is, just in case. And I would love nothing more than for David to just show up and say, "Hey guys, JK, I was just hiding out for a couple days." That night, do you remember Eric leaving the house? Yeah. Okay.
I was thinking of
Where at?
I was standing outside.
To put it bluntly, Eric's story didn't make any sense at all, and he was acting extremely suspicious. Investigators continued to try their patience with him, hoping that something somewhere would clear him as a suspect, but things were only piling up against him and getting even worse. They tried to confirm Eric's most recent story regarding the friend being dropped off and Eric's lone party trip to Anchorage, but this again proved to be impossible. So the next step for investigators was to request a search warrant for Eric's belongings. When the warrant was approved, officers immediately confiscated a number of items from Eric's home, including a tablet. A search was done on this tablet, and a forensics team was able to recover the GPS history of the tablet's movements on the night of November 13th. These movements indicated that Eric had traveled to and from the sites corresponding with David's vehicle and his remains, and so the pressure was now on Eric Allmendinger. Officers then immediately arrested Eric Allmendinger and brought him in for an interview.
Before we get too far ahead of ourselves, just one thing we have to get straight, and that is your rights. Do you understand each of these rights as I've explained to you?
Yes, sir.
Having these rights in mind, do you wish to talk to us about your involvement in David Grunwald's disappearance? Eric? Eric?
It's over. Okay? I just saw the pictures of the inside of my trailer. You guys did a really shitty job at cleaning up all the blood splatter everywhere. Don't.
Can I see it?
It's very important. Okay? I can't help you if you don't help me. Okay? We've all had enough of the lying for so long now. Now is the time. The DA has said, if you cooperate, things are going to go a lot easier on you.
So if you didn't pull the trigger, we need to know that. If you just stood by, we need to know.
I can't believe my son would be a part of this. Of all things, we want to know why.
Why?
What did he have that you wanted?
Nothing.
Then why?
Somebody.
I just said I didn't have anything to do with this.
Why is it in our trailer then?
Didn't it get broken into?
No.
It really did though.
Eric, you need to stop this. This is enough. You fancy yourself smarter than everybody else. You're beat. You've lost. The opportunity now sits in front of you to take advantage of the chance to come clean, take responsibility for your portion, move on with life. You're 16 years old. You got your whole life ahead of you.
After looking at the picture, I didn't even realize that my blood runner was gone. because you had to get rid of that. That's where my green extension cord is. Because you used it to tie it up around David.
The green extension cord is at Melissa's house. We brought it there. That part's true.
Then why didn't you tell me that when I asked about it?
Because you didn't know where I was. Why don't you tell them where you were? I was at Melissa's house. Where? Well, that's only partially true. Why didn't you start at the beginning? I started at the beginning with you, and he already knows as much as you know.
Okay,
That's where you're wrong, Eric.
Cindy, when this happened, you were home when David walked in the back door. You had been with him earlier? Well then,
No.
how could...
Because David just come walking down. I would have to be outside, and he just come walking up.
Eric Allmendinger continued to deny any involvement for a major portion of this interrogation. However, throughout the conversation, Eric found himself cornered by evidence that contradicted his claims, causing him to noticeably change his story several times. Until finally, Eric began to crack.
Here, see if you can. What's your cell number?
You've got to tell the truth, okay?
8850. I'm just
Then
gonna
talk
text it
what
to
you told,
Yeah,
honey.
and then you can
Now,
email it yourself.
then just say what happened. Swallow that kiss-ass attitude you have, and now start caring for yourself.
It's good advice, Eric.
You know we love you.
It's good advice, Eric. It's only good if you take it, brother.
Right?
Good advice is only good if you take it.
You know we love you, so come on. What happened that night? You got the brave idea to decide to shoot that child. Who? You've got to say. Yeah, it's going to be bad. But let's get through this together.
Unfortunately, the audio quality throughout the course of this interrogation only goes downhill from here, so I'm going to do my best to summarize Eric's claims. This is Eric's story. On November 13th, David called Eric just after 7 p.m. to see what he was up to. Eric told him that he was partying and had a friend over, so David then came over shortly after the call. After arriving, David, Eric, and another friend, Dominic Johnson, began hanging out in an old camper right behind Eric's house. Apparently, they were all smoking cannabis and having drinks. David turned down the booze since he was still planning to drive home around 9 p.m. David then became selfish with the weed stash and smoked it all, which extremely annoyed Eric and Dom. This is where things got physical. Apparently, after arguing about the weed issue, Dom and Eric pulled out a gun and began striking David on the head with it. David fell to the ground and the beating resumed. The two then pick up David, who is now bleeding heavily and drifting in and out of consciousness, and carried him to the back seat of his own vehicle. They then commandeered the vehicle and drove just under a half hour out of town, towards a heavily wooded area. During the drive, David asked, "Can you just drop me off at home?" But one of the two replied, "You're not going home tonight." They then parked the vehicle, pulled David out from the back seat, walked him a slight distance further into the woods, and then Dominic fired the kill shot. Afterwards, the two headed back to David's vehicle, drove it to another location not very far away, lit it on fire, and then walked for another 30 minutes. They then hailed a cab back to Eric's house. They attempted to clean up the crime scene by burning Eric's carpet and using bleach on any hard surfaces. They then reached out to another friend who allowed them both to spend the night in his unheated shed. This story came across rather twisted and possibly strategically altered, as it seemed to work in favor of the suspects as opposed to against them. For example, Eric is now stating that this crime happened suddenly with zero premeditation. He is accusing David of drug use and claiming that David basically stole something that did not belong to him, resulting in the unexpected altercation. And he is claiming that he did not fire the kill shot. Instead, it was Dominic Johnson. Investigators questioned this story, but continued their search for answers. And it wasn't long before more arrests were made.
Well, today we are getting our first look at the 5 teenagers arrested in connection to David Grunwald's murder.
Eric Allmendinger, Bradley Renfro, Dominic Johnson, and Austin Barrett face murder and kidnapping charges. Allmendinger, Renfro, and Johnson also face a tampering with evidence charge, and Devin Peterson is charged with tampering with evidence and hindering prosecution.
After the charges were placed against Eric following the interrogation, investigators continued to build their case against him. They continued to search Eric's father's property, attempt to reconstruct Eric's actual movements that day, and also forensically recover any deleted phone calls or messages sent to or from Eric. During this process, a discovery was made that implicated the 3 additional suspects. It was a group chat that contained a series of messages vulgarly speaking about the murder as well as making disgusting statements like this one. F with a 16-year-old genius, see what happens when you're smarter than the ops. It became relatively clear that this was in fact a premeditated murder, one that became a reality when David believed that he was going to a party with his 4 friends. And then such friends, Eric, Austin, Bradley, and Dominic, brutally beat, transported, and then shot him in the woods. The 5th new suspect, Devin Peterson, was only being charged as it became clear that he had known about the murder from the night of, and withheld every detail from the police. Regardless, this group was very evidently comprised of evil, murderous scumbags. One example of their character being on display happened in the courthouse right after the group's first court appearance. This is Bradley Renfro, mouthing to a grieving Grunwald family to do something. Real class act. This is another one of the suspects, Austin Barrett. Austin posted this video to YouTube not long before the murder took place.
Fresh freestyles, fresh air, motherfucker, we don't care. Up here in Alaska, it's cold as fuck like our hearts in our trucks. Motherfucker, what? We got sports cars too and drifting gurus. When you think of us, probably didn't think much, but I'll tell you what, we're takers of fame and game, and your women country living.
Okay, I'm just gonna stop that there. Enough said. About 9 months after the additional 4 arrests were made, in September of 2017, the judge overseeing the case made a determination to have Eric Allmendinger tried alone and the others tried together. This was eventually changed, and they were all tried separately. And on May 8th, 2018, Eric Allmendinger's trial began. The prosecution came out strong, outlining the exact movements of nearly every person involved as told by their own personal GPS history. He went on to explain each injury that David Grunwald received and had a medical expert explain precisely how these injuries happened. He even managed to find a series of photos from the days immediately after David's murder, which displayed the 5 suspects partying as if nothing ever happened, clearly demonstrating a complete lack of guilt. Eric's defense tried to paint Eric as if he was also a victim that night, stating that he was surely a part of the chat and making jokes about it, but he was not the one who pulled the trigger, and that he was suffering emotionally due to what he witnessed. This is actually quite strange, considering the way that he seemed to enjoy giving the play-by-play during the latter part of his interrogation.
No, he pushes him into the spot, and he's still standing. And he turns him around facing us, and as soon as he looks up at Andrew, that's when the bullet goes. And he does nothing but just drop. His legs give out. His head hits the ground before his body does.
All of Eric's accomplices went on to state that Eric was the lone gunman that was also pulling the strings and orchestrating each move. And Eric and Dominic were both eventually found guilty of first-degree and second-degree murder, manslaughter, kidnapping, evidence tampering, vehicle theft, and arson. During Brad Renfro's trial, Brad made the decision to testify. He went on to claim that he was there but had no part in the beating or shooting of David. He was unable to stop Eric and Dominic, so he just went along with it. His play-by-play of the evening was relatively similar to that of Eric's, other than making it clear that the plan to murder David came up suddenly while David was in the bathroom. After everything, Eric Allmendinger and Dominic Johnson were sentenced to 99 years behind bars. Bradley Renfro, aka Mr. Do Something, received the heaviest sentence of 105 years. However, 30 of those years are suspended. Horrible rapper Austin Barrett decided to plead guilty and received a sentence of 45 years. Devin Peterson received a 6-year sentence for tampering with evidence after making a plea deal.